we understood what is an MVP, theoretically, let's understand how an MVP experiment is supposed to be conducted. Like any scientific experiment, an MVP experiment also needs to be done in a very diligent step-by-step process. It's very easy to actually sidetrack or to divert or to distract yourself into doing something which is not relevant. And that is why having a step-by-step process, or at least a checklist on your whiteboard or on your notepad or something that you can refer back again and again so that you know what you're doing, is very, very critical when you're running an MVP experiment. Typically, an MVP experiment would run between 2 weeks to 12 weeks. Depends on the scale, depends on the sample size that you're trying to attack. Uh, but having a clear path and having a clear idea that okay, it's going to take me 2 weeks or it's going to take me 12 weeks is very, very critical. Don't expect to get results immediately. Most often you will not get it. Almost all the time you should be, I would say the majority of the experiments run between 4 weeks to 8 weeks. Okay, but depending on the size and the sample of data that you are looking for, you might have to do it for 12 weeks, but not beyond 12 weeks. That's too long a time for an MVP, right? So to run an MVP experiment, typically there are 7 steps. So first of all, you will start with identifying the problem by listening to the voice of the customer, which is basically talking to the customer, identifying what are they looking for, what are they troubled with, and so on. Then you will create a solution set. That is, for this problem, these are the different solutions that we can attack. For example, I'm hungry. Now, my hunger can be solved by multiple ways. I can cook at home, I can go out, I can order, I can do so many things, right? And each of the solutions have their own dependencies. They have their own pros and cons. If I'm cooking at home, that basically means I need to know how to cook. Number two, I should have all the supplies and all the groceries required to cook. Number three, I should have the time to cook, right? Number four, if I'm a little picky eater, then I need to know, for example, if I like to eat Italian, but I do not know how to cook Italian, then again the solution is defeated, right? Versus going out has its own benefits, but you can create your own solution sets effectively, right? And then you have to figure out what is the right solution for a set of audience that you're looking for. For example, cooking at home sounds like a very good option for, let's say, bootstrapped founders or students, uh, you know, who are little low on cash most of the time. Or, for example, if they have a certain dietary preference which they cannot access in their locality. For example, they are vegetarian, but they cannot find many vegetarian options around them. So then they do not have much option. They will cook at home. Uh, but let's imagine the same solution is not very much applicable for, let's say, a tourist or a traveler, because he will typically not have the time or the resources, because he'll not have kitchen, he'll not have groceries, and it'll be too tiring for him to actually get the groceries unless and until he's staying for a very, very long time, right? So the same simple example of cooking at home or ordering or just solving the hunger has so many different solution sets depending on which audience you're talking about. And just imagine if you have a much larger problem, so many different customers, so many different solutions, so you have to create a solution set for different audiences. Then you have to determine what assumptions for the problem solution set. So for example, the assumption was like cook at home. The assumption was the person knows how to cook. The assumption was that all the utensils and everything is available at home. The assumption was that all the groceries are at home, right? So you have to create the assumptions, you have to determine those assumptions for the problem solution set that you have created. For this problem, this is the solution. For this problem, this is the solution. This could be a one-to-many mapping, that is, for one problem there are multiple solutions, when you have to create each of these set, and you have to create assumptions for each of this set. Okay, now you have to create testable hypotheses around the assumptions. Okay, so once, let's say, you have assumed that um, the person would know how to cook, or is capable of teaching himself how to cook, let's say, right? Or that itself becomes a testable hypothesis, that can we test that this person, although not knowing how to cook, can learn how to cook, right? And then you design testable hypothesis experiments around this assumption, right? Now once you have defined that what are you testing, the next thing is you have to determine, like in those chemistry experiments and physics experiments, you have to determine and set the minimum criteria for success that will measure the validity of the hypothesis. So let's say you decided that the experiment was that we are going to determine whether the person can cook or not, right? Now for that, now the question is, are you planning to teach him to become a Michelin star cook, or you're planning to just give him survivable cooking skills? Can he boil egg, for example? That's like the minimum, for example, in your world, right? Or according to you, the minimum criteria for success is, can he make a salad? That is, can he cut vegetables and fruits or whatever salad groceries are? And can he, let's say, can he boil an egg, right? So that is the minimum criteria that you have said, that if this is happening, the experiment is successful, this is all good, we can take this assumption and we can move ahead. Okay, once you have done all of this, next comes, what is the, once you have understood this, that okay, these assumptions are valid, these assumptions are not valid, and they are valid under this constraint and so on, then you have to determine what are the type of MVP technique you can use to for your experiment, right? You want to run this experiment for a decent enough time to make sure that this solution is workable and it is expandable, it is scalable, right? Then you plan and execute the MVP experiment and then you iterate it. Okay, let me go deeper into each one of these steps from here. So the first step is always to listen to the voice of the customer. The voice of the customer directs you to the problem, the eventuality, and eventually to the solution. As a product manager, you should always ask questions. Who will buy the product? Why should anybody buy the product? How will they buy it? What are the reasons for buying it? And so on. Let's talk about Uber, for instance. Uber's founder noticed that people wanted to rent premium black cars from local taxi companies, but were being unable to do so because they were too expensive and it was too problematic. It was like you have to call them, then they will call back, then they will call you. It was a nightmare. And they started with the renting premium black cars, ultimately becoming what they became. Um, but they eventually started and they were able to scale up and they were able to do what they did because they started talking to their customers much more frequently. With what started as a small little problem from the founders perspective eventually became a much larger problem, right? So when I talk about voice of the customer, it's very important to understand that what person says versus what person does is very different. What person says is attitudinal, what person does is behavioral. And typically, when you're building a product or designing a product, when you're designing it around behavioral activities, it's most likely going to be sticking. Okay, people say a lot of things, but they actually do something very different, and that's why be very cautious of what they're saying versus what they're actually doing. So your questions around the problem that you're trying to articulate should be around uh, should be around uh, understanding the behavioral uh, traits of the customer. Okay, not so much on the attitudinal part. Okay, what is a behavioral? What's a good behavioral question? For example, let's say going back to the previous example of cooking. Um, a good behavioral question would be, when was the last time you cooked at home? I'm not asking whether you like to cook, whether you don't like to cook. Given a chance, would you like to cook, and so on. I'm simply asking, when was the last time you cooked, right? Now, if the person says 2 days back or versus 2 years back, that itself speaks a volume about what they actually do. correct? The second step in the process of MVP experiment is to determine the assumptions you're making in the problem solution set, right? So now once you know that what the problem is and you have brainstormed solutions, you have unknowingly made many assumptions. It is very important at this stage to understand your target audience. This can be done by using user personas. It is very important to understand your um, customers. Only if you understand your customers, will your assumptions be accurate. However, it is not always possible to be that accurate. Therefore, the user personas. As you can probably understand that there would be multiple assumptions, but you have to prioritize them. Begin by tackling the riskiest assumptions. Okay, this is my key takeaway from this unit, that you have to start by tackling the riskiest assumptions. Riskiest assumptions are those that, if proven wrong, can stand to have a devastating impact on the product success. Some examples of assumptions. Let's look at Uber again. Timeliness is the most important attribute for, say, a particular group of customers, like office goers, right? Now, this is an assumption. You are making an assumption for that. Timeliness is actually coupled with price. If you say that, yeah, I'll get you to the destination the fastest, but you have to pay me a premium of 100% or 100 or 50%. Some people, depending on their context and their situation, are they going to meet are they going to meet their investor? Are they going to meet their boss? Are they going to meet their girlfriend? Are they going to pick up a friend? They can choose to delay it. They can choose to. So sometimes time becomes important. Sometimes price becomes important, right? Um, Moving along. So once you have your set of riskiest assumptions that you need to validate, you need to build testable hypotheses around these assumptions. Developing a product is no less than a scientific experiment. Just as in scientific experiments, we create assumptions and hypotheses. Unlike assumptions, though, hypotheses are measurable, actionable, and have an outcome. Okay, let's have these things very clear. Assumptions are not actionable, they are not measurable, they do not have a target audience, they do not have an outcome. Okay, versus hypotheses are actionable, they are measurable, they have a target audience, has an impactful outcome, right? So, for example, in hypothesis, the example is, we believe millennials will be indifferent to price changes because millennials belong to a higher income group. We will know we are right when the number of customers who are millennials remain unchanged when we increase the price, for example, right? The assumption is the millennials are less sensitive to the change in price for this product, right? But hypothesis makes it dead clear. We exactly know what will the success criteria be, how will we measure it, what is the target audience, what is the impactful outcome, everything. The step 4 is to measure the hypothesis. You need to set metrics that will determine if the hypotheses are valid, right? And these are typically the minimum criteria for success. It is a break-even point that validates your assumptions through the hypothesis, right? To define this criteria, what you can do is, for example, you can look at the cost you would incur. For example, the wages, the material cost, the cost of building, brand image, anything, correct? And then list the rewards or returns you expect. Are you expecting increase in revenue, or customer rating, or customer lifetime value, or brand awareness, which then reflects in number of page views? Could be anything. Next is to determine the MVP technique you would like for your experiment. The main idea behind building an MVP is not to see the technical feasibility, but to see if it's even worth the effort to build the product. We'll be talking in detail about the various techniques of administering MVP tests later, but these techniques help you put forth the minimum viable product to your customers. Okay, there are many such examples. We are just talking about two of them. For example, piecemeal or email MVP, and so on. We will be talking about them. The next step is to plan and execute the MVP experiment. So at this step, you have completed the due diligence. Now you need to plan and execute the experiment. To execute the experiment, it is important to set up a data collection plan for each of the minimum criteria of success. right? You can see an example of this plan uh, here in this. So say the minimum criteria for success is customer satisfaction. What sort of data will be needed? Where will the data come from? How much data should be collected? With this plan in place, the MVP can be launched and data collected, right? So minimum criteria for success was, let's say, increase in revenue or customer satisfaction. What is the data source? Survey results. How will the data be collected? In-app survey. How will we collect the data? Third party Qualtrics. Qualtrics is a software. When will the data be collected? Week of November 26th, 2018, for example. The sample size and the collected, yes or no. So then you can have a clear direction that your experiment was successful or not. Step 7 is, once the MVP reaches market, enthusiasts or early adopters would begin giving feedback. Feedback can be collected in many ways, but surveys are the most popular form. So some helpful survey tools are SurveyMonkey, Google Forms, Qualtrics. There's so many. Typeform. So other ways of collecting feedback are through live chat sessions or calling customers. The latter is a very traditional method and is not really effective, or I would say it is not very scalable. Okay, it can be effective depending on um, it depends basically on a lot of factors, what kind of things you're selling, but in general it's the least effective because of the time that it takes versus the response you get. But at times it also can give you a lot of behavioral insights which you might not get purely from the data that you've collected. So it's a hit or a miss. So once you've collected feedback and data, you'll be able to validate your assumptions and build robust solutions. See, product development is a continuous development process. It follows many iterations, and with each iteration, new problems surface and new solutions are made and validated through hypothesis testing. So, this entire process from step 1 to step 7 is an MVP cycle. Okay, and this MVP cycle is something that you will keep on running, keep on running, keep on running. So the faster you get to the first MVP cycle might not be the most perfect one. You realize that, okay, data collection methods are not so great, or data analysis methods are not so great. We made some foolish assumptions. We actually didn't go out and speak to the customers. So after a few iterations of your MVP cycle, your MVP cycle will actually get very, very good. So don't be disheartened in the beginning, because it will not everything will go as per plan, but by the fourth or the fifth cycle things should start falling in plan, and you will exactly have a good timeline that, okay, we are running a 2 week experiment, we are running a 4 week experiment, okay, and we'll get the data in a cycle. So that's pretty much it about how to run MVP experiment. Hopefully this was good. See you again. Take care.